And before you, so you can't run out on us before we call attention to you. This is a token of our appreciation from the museum for being here today. There you go.
In November 1854, in a cold-blowing norther, the hero of the Texas Revolution 18 years prior, Sam Houston, was baptized in a creek at Independence. Houston was a renowned sinner before he came to faith as an older man. His shortcomings were well known and widely celebrated. He was a full member of the Cherokee Nation. His Indian name was Colonne, the Raven, but his Indian nickname was Big Drunk. His Hispanic nickname was worse than that. Houston was baptized by Rufus Burleson, co-founder of Baylor University, and Burleson, being the good Baptist, had him in the creek for a full immersion. The Big Drunk took the Big Dunk. And as Burleson pulled this 6'4" mountain of a man up out of the water, he looked up at him and he said, "My son, your sins are washed away." To which Houston replied, "God help the fish." Sam Houston often had himself depicted wearing a shawl, as he is shown here on the left. That's because he valued his Indian roots. He had run away from home as a teenager. He was raised by the Cherokee. He adopted their customs, their dress. He learned the language, and in a very real sense, he considered the Cherokee his family. There is a historical truth in our world, and it's this: mankind is ruled by oppression until some are willing to die that others may live free. Do not let those words be lost on you. Mankind is always ruled by oppression. Period. Full stop. But only until some are willing to die that others may live free. That's the story of the Texas Revolution in one sentence. Indeed, it's the story of all free people throughout all time at some point or points in their existence. In 1800, Texas was little more than a name on a map. It was part of New Spain, shown here in yellow. The boundaries of New Spain ran from the present U.S.-Canadian border to the southern tip of South America. Exclude part of modern-day Brazil, the 16-state-strong United States, and the Oregon Territory. New Spain was the second largest country in the world, behind Russia, roughly equal to the size of China. A situation existed in New Spain. We will call it the problem. The problem was the Indians. Not all of them, just some of them, like the Comanche. They lived in Texas and well north of Texas, and they kept raiding as far south as Mexico City, the seat of government. The Spanish Army and later the Mexican Army, after their independence in 1821, were both completely helpless to do anything about the Indian problem. Both of those armies were large and formidable Napoleonic war machines, but they were heavy, wagons, artillery, slow. The Indians, fast, aggressive, stealthy. You did not know where they came from. You did not know where they went, so you could not fight them conventionally. Now, the politicians down in Mexico City, they're not concerned at all about these Indian raids occurring in the distant frontier outposts of Texas. But they're very interested in those raids occurring in their bedrooms. So, Spain developed, and Mexico later codified the scheme. The scheme to fix the Indian problem. And the scheme was, let's entice the American Anglos to move to Texas. Let's get him to settle that frontier for us. He'll be the Indian fodder, and the Indians will leave us alone down here in Mexico City. And it worked. That is why you live here. Now, in order to entice the American Anglo to come to this wild frontier where there are only three things: land, natural resources, and Indians, have a nice day, Mexico offered two very significant enticements. Number one, free or extremely cheap land. If you were fortunate enough to be accepted by an impresario whose job it was to give away land on behalf of the Mexican government for the purpose of settling an area, Stephen F. Austin being the first and greatest impresario, the land was free. It was granted to you. If not, it was very, very cheap. Every day I carry in my pocket this coin. This is a 50-cent piece, US, minted in 1836. On the face of this coin is a woman wearing a cap. It says liberty. On the back is the motto of the United States, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. This is my reminder that we are a wildly diverse people, racially, ethnically, socially, religiously, economically. But we are a people who together share a vested interest in this magnificently valuable ball in the middle of our society called freedom. And we best pay better attention to the maintenance of that big freedom ball, because freedom is not self-sustaining. In the run-up to the Texas Revolution, this coin, 50 cents, US, and the US dollar was the coin of the realm in Texas in that era. This coin bought 45 acres of Texas. That's 1.1 cents an acre. Some of you finance people ought to run the IRR on that deal. So number one enticement to get the Anglo to move to Texas was free or cheap land. Number two, constitutionally guaranteed rights and freedoms that mirrored those in the United States. Those rights and freedoms were codified in the Mexican Constitution of 1824. It was a fabulous Federalist document modeled after the U.S. Constitution. And as Mexico moved towards this republic form of limited government, in the background was rising the military strongman, Antonio de Padua, Maria Severino, Lopez de Santa Anna y Perez de Lebrun, better known to us as Santa Anna. He would, of course, ascend to the presidency and in 11 short years cancel that constitution. Okay, I want you to think about it. If you're poor, living in the United States in that era, you could make 1,000-mile journey to Texas and be a landowner. That was big. If you were a fugitive from the law, Texas is a pretty good place for you to go, because you're not going to get arrested out there, because there's no law enforcement out there, because there is no law to enforce out there. And if you are a debtor who could not pay his or her debts, Texas is a happy place for you too. Nobody is going to find you out there. In fact, that was so common that sheriffs in the United States, when they attempted to serve writs to these non-paying debtors, when they could not locate them, commonly wrote on the writ, GTT, gone to Texas. And boy, did the people come. In the run-up to the Texas Revolution, let me say this. The scheme to fix the Indian problem was so successful that it quickly bred the fear. The fear on behalf of the Mexican authorities that all these Anglos moving into Texas would never be able to culturally integrate into Mexican society. And they began to view the Anglo through the lens of distrust, even though most of what they did was good, or at least well-intended. In the run-up to the Texas Revolution, Mexico is a nation of 8 million citizens. 30,000 of those Mexican citizens lived in Texas. And, listen closely, the Anglo-Mexican citizens in Texas outnumbered the Hispanic Mexican citizens in Texas 6-1. Mexico began a campaign of pulling back on these rights and freedoms guaranteed to its citizens in Texas under the Constitution, very subtly at first. At best, what you can say is that Mexico began to ignore Texas and the needs of its Anglo citizens. At worst, it was a targeted, intentional, ethnically based campaign of discrimination against its very own citizens. And there was plenty of both. This campaign against the Texans culminated in the Decree of 1830, also known as the Law of April 6, which completely and strictly forbid all immigration from the United States into Mexican Texas. Well, truth be known, nobody paid any attention to it. They kept coming. But now those that came were illegal immigrants, and they were denied some of the privileges of citizenship. That's an interesting concept to revisit these days, isn't it?
Indeed.
Well, this campaign against the Texans, motivated by the fear of the Mexican fear of the growing number of Anglos, quickly bred the need. The need on behalf of Anglo-Mexican citizens in Texas for better political representation. Stephen F. Austin personally travels to Mexico City to plead the case that Texas be given separate statehood under the Mexican Federation. Up until that time, Texas was an appendage to the Mexican state of Coahuila. The state constitution of Coahuila y Texas contained provisions that said, as soon as Texas should be in a position to be its own standalone state, it should make application to the federal government in Mexico City. Austin was doing exactly what the document said he should do. He was not received well. He was distrusted. He was viewed as a traitor. He was thrown in jail. He was never charged with a crime. He was never even given an explanation for why he was in jail. He's just in jail, in a dungeon cell left over from the Spanish Inquisition. And Austin would be absent Texas for 2.5 years. You should know, if you don't already, that Stephen Austin was a staunch Mexican nationalist. He would not tolerate any conversation about independence. He actively squelched independence movements during his tenure. But when Austin returned to Texas after his 2.5-year hiatus, September the 1st, 1835, he was a changed man who, in a speech given to 1,000 people there at Brazoria 1 week later, said, "Will the people of Texas submit to all this? Let each man study the subject and answer for himself. If he will submit, let him go to the military power and prostrate himself. If he will not submit, let him give his answer from the mouth of his rifle." You should also know that Stephen Austin paid for that trip out of his own pocket. That's one of the reasons why when he died in December of 36, 8 months after the revolution, he was dead flat broke, deep in debt, did not so much as even have a roof over his head in Texas that he could call his own. But in a letter to a friend written 2 months before he died, as he was lamenting his plight, he said, "But I am without regret, because everything I have done has been in the service of Texas." Can you hear him shouting from the Republic? Stephen Austin, of course, was a businessman, an entrepreneur, a man of very slight build. He was not a cowboy. Okay, so all these things, the Indian problem, the scheme to fix the Indian problem, the fear of the growing number of Anglos and the resulting Mexican campaign against them, and these Anglos turning around and making their demands and requests back to the Mexican government, ultimately caused the reaction. The reaction by the Mexican government to militarily occupy Texas and subject its very own citizens. That campaign of subjection quickly turned into a campaign of extermination, and the Texans knew it because they had intercepted some correspondence. Anglo-Texas was now effectively under a death sentence. What began here largely as a movement to restore rights under the Mexican Constitution of 1824, only at the very end became a wholesale campaign for independence. And it all comes to a head early one October morning, 1835. Gonzales. Come and take it. I'll bet you know the story. Under the cover of a dense morning fog, a detachment from the Mexican army stationed in San Antonio, Bihar, had traveled 60 miles to the east to Gonzales to confiscate a cannon given to the settlers by the Mexican government 4 years earlier for defense against the Indians. Under the cover of a dense morning fog, the settlers wheeled this bad boy across a creek into an open field to within 350 yards of that Mexican detachment. And when the fog lifted, under the come and take it flag, they fired it off. Okay. Here's what you may not know about Gonzales. According to the museum in Gonzales, that cannon has a bore on it that is only ever so slightly bigger than this coin. The whole thing is 22 inches long. There it is. That couldn't throw anything meaningful 350 yards to save the world. Mexican commander Lieutenant Francisco Castañeda calls for a parley. He's met in the middle by acting commander of the Gonzales Brigade, John Moore. This is what happens. Castañeda says, ¿Por qué me estás disparando? Why are you shooting at me? John Moore says, well, let's see. We'll count the reasons here. Number one, you're here to take our cannon. We're not going to give it to you. And you appear ready to use force in case we resist. And so let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We outnumber you about 2 to 1, so you can figure that out. And then there's the whole issue about you taking orders from this turncoat whack job, Santa Anna, who's trampling on our Constitution, stealing our rights, and we will fight for those rights to the end. So, vaquero pequeño, little cowboy, how do you want to do this? This is what Castañeda says. Hey, I am one of you. I'm a Republican too. I'm opposed to Santa Anna and his consolidating power. So is 2/3 of the Mexican nation. We're all opposed to him. We're on the same side. I do not want to fight you. But there's this little issue about my orders, and I really need to, just take the cannon and I'll be on my way. It's all good. What do you say? John Moore says, thanks for playing. Door number 1, you and all your people can surrender to me right now. Door number 2, you and all your people can join our side right now. What's it going to be? Castañeda indicates he chooses door number 3. He will obey orders and take the cannon. And the parley ends. A very, very short skirmish ensues. A few shots were fired. According to Noah Smithwick, 1 Mexican died. No Texans did. The whole thing was over as fast as it started, and this detachment beats a hasty retreat back to San Antonio and the safety of the larger army stationed there. In the ways of warfare, Gonzales was nothing, but it was to the settlers, to the Texans, what the affair at Lexington had been to the U.S. colonies 60 years before. The first shots of the Revolution had been fired. Later that same month, October 1835, President Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna publishes to the world that the Federalist Constitution of 1824 is no longer. He is now the dictator. I want you to stop and consider the state of affairs in Texas immediately following that. The Constitution has been canceled. Stephen F. Austin, the man most responsible for Anglo immigration into Texas, has left Texas on a mission to the United States to procure sympathy and assistance. The Texas militia now numbers 700 men, and it is camped out in a siege of sorts around the town of San Antonio Bahar and the Mexican army stationed there. And it is confused and cannot decide what to do. Its leader, Austin, he's gone. The new guy, Edward Burleson, that's Rufus' brother, great fighter, survived 32 battles in his lifetime. Terrible leader. He let the militia try to figure out what they wanted to do. Half of the militia wanted to engage and fight the Mexican centrist army right then and there. The other half, they wanted to go home for the winter time and come back in the spring when the weather is nice and fight them. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. And the political leaders, the old guys, are clinging to this ridiculous notion that somehow they are going to restore their rights under the defunct Constitution and remain good Mexican citizens. Thanksgiving time, 1835 in Texas, was absolute, complete, utter, leaderless chaos. Into this void rides one of the most unheralded heroes of the Texas Revolution, Ben Milam. Milam is 6'5". Wow. I hit the right button and there you go. He has a fantastic personality. He is a leader of leaders. He's been in jail down in Mexico under the charge of treason, and he escapes and he shows up on a horse at this confused militia in San Antonio. Actually, he really didn't escape. He bribed the guards and they just let him out. And that's not the whole story. Those guards, they're Republicans too. They were more than happy to accommodate this gringo Anglo leader of theirs. They just let him out of jail and they gave him the horse. He shows up in San Antonio with this confused militia, says to hell with this, and famously proclaims, "Who will go into San Antonio with old Ben Milam?" That very day, the Battle of Bahar begins. It will last 6 days, and it will result in the complete capitulation of the entire Mexican army in Texas, the withdrawal of that army to south of the Rio Grande, the abandonment in the Alamo of 21 cannons and 400 or 500 rifles, and the agreement by its leader, Mexican General Cos, to never again set foot on Texas soil. The Battle of Bahar is fascinating. I want you to look at this picture. I took this picture of an original oil painting. It's hanging on the wall in the Bryan Museum in Galveston. I want you to forget what is happening in the foreground. Look at the background. That is San Antonio in 1836. That's a one-story, flat roof, adobe row house. It was like a townhouse. It had common walls in it, and it housed multiple families. There were enough of these row houses to house 2,400 people, the civilian population of San Antonio being the largest settlement in Texas. The Battle of Bahar happened in the town of San Antonio. It was sniper fire from the rooftops and through the windows, neither side making any headway over the other side, until the Texans come up with a clever idea. They cut down trees, and they used the 10 or 12 foot long stumps as battering rams at night to knock holes in the end units of these row houses. And then during the day, they work their way through the common walls until they're in control of the entire row house. Next night, rinse and repeat. It changed the battle. The civilian population of San Antonio, which at that time was all Hispanic, panics because these big Anglos are knocking holes in their houses. Cause's army starts to desert. Many that remain have conflicting loyalties. They're Republicans too, conscripted into the army. It was an untenable situation. Under the cover of darkness, General Cos, what was left of his army, and the civilian population of San Antonio retreats a half a mile away into the safety and confines of the Alamo compound, and he surrenders. Now I want you to consider the state of affairs in Texas 1 month later, Christmas time, 1835. The entire Mexican army in Texas has been defeated. That army has left Texas. There's not a single active Mexican soldier on Texas soil. The woefully under-equipped Texas militia is now flush with arms. At least they are in the Alamo and in San Antonio, not so much anywhere else. A few weeks prior to the Battle of Behar was the Battle of Concepcion. That's a mission 1 mile south of the old town of San Antonio Behar, now of course well within the city limits. A group of 90 Texas militiamen on a scouting mission had been surrounded at night by a Mexican army detachment 4 times bigger than they were, and the Mexicans had a cannon. They fought it out at dawn. And in something akin to a military miracle, not only do the Texans prevail, kill 80 of them, capture the cannon, and send the rest of them fleeing, they do it all with the cost of 1 man killed, nobody injured. And a few weeks before that were successful military actions at Goliad and Gonzales. Spirits in Texas soared at Christmas time, 1835. And the belief began to circulate among the militia that 1 Texas farmer with a gun was equal to, some said 5, and some said 10 Mexican Army regulars, many of whom, of course, were just conscripts. What we have here is the lull before the storm. Everybody knew Santa Anna was coming back with a vengeance, and the Texans did the math to figure out how long it would take this defeated army to walk back to Mexico City. Most of them are on foot. That's almost 1,000 miles. Retool, resupply, and walk a bigger, slower army back to Texas. And they figured he could do it in 6 months, mid-June, and they would be ready. Santa Anna, on the other hand, felt threatened. He did not wait for that defeated army. He immediately death marched a new army back to San Antonio, and he did it in 2, mid-February. That's why the Alamo was surprised. They weren't even going to start looking for an army for another couple of months. The description of that death march by the second in command of the Mexican military General Feliz Sola is terrible. So many soldiers died along the way from nothing more than exhaustion. And it wasn't even hot. It was wintertime. And the Alamo happens. I'll bet you know that story. An hour and a half before dawn, on Sunday, March the 6th, the silence was broken by Mexican General Castrillon's bugle, summoning the assault. The Mexican Army Band played El Deguelo, the Assassin's Song. A half a mile away from the walls of the Alamo, in plain sight of it, in the steeple of what is today the San Fernando Cathedral in San Antonio, flew a blood-red flag, signaling to the occupants that no quarter would be given. Inside the Alamo, 3 flags, at least that we know about, were flying. One of them was a modified Mexican flag in which the crest was removed and replaced with 2 stars, representing separate states of Coahuila and Texas. It was an in-your-face reminder to the Mexican dictator that the Texans had tried to stay loyal to the Mexican nation, asking for their constitutionally guaranteed rights and freedoms, asking for separate statehood, all of which had been unceremoniously denied. Under these circumstances, the assault is engaged. 90 minutes later, at dawn on the 6th, the last offender is dead. The youngest was 15. Here's what you may not know about the Alamo. David Crockett apparently kept a journal. He started that journal when he left Tennessee. His last entry was March the 5th. His last words, liberty and independence forever. Crockett is a fascinating character. He's very smart. He's a visionary. He's a man of principle. It's all wrapped up in a mountain man's body. He's a congressman from Tennessee. He had just lost his re-election bid. He's convinced his opponent stole the election from him by paying voters in cash for their votes. He names names, he names prices, and he famously proclaims to his constituents that had just voted him out of office, "You can all go to hell. I'm going to Texas." And he goes to Texas with the express intent of inserting himself into the freedom fight. He arrives tomorrow, February the 8th, and he's dead less than a month later. Crockett died what he called in his journal the most pleasant death of a patriot. Can you hear him shouting from the Republic? The story is told that that journal was found in his belongings by a servant of Mexican General Castrillon. He subsequently died at San Jacinto. Charles Beale recovered that diary, that journal, had a ghostwriter finish it, and it was published in the latter part of 1836. I have an original of that book.
Wow.
Meanwhile, 4 days, by the way, of course you know this, that this is a picture of the chapel inside the Alamo. At the time of the battle, it had no roof on it, and the little curly Q in the top middle, that was a later addition. Meanwhile, 4 days before the Alamo falls, 160 miles to the east, by the way, that's Crockett, delegates convene at the tiny little settlement of Washington on the Brazos River up by Navasota. In the opening minutes of March the 2nd, they unanimously passed a Declaration of Independence. Of the 59 people that signed that document, not 58 as is commonly held, 40 of them, 2/3 of the signers, were in their 20s and 30s. 11 signers of the Texas Declaration of Independence were 20-something years old. 2 days later, March 4, Sam Houston is appointed commander of the Texas Army, now extending his authority from not just over the Texas Army regulars, of which there were only a very few. His authority now is extended to include the volunteers as well. 2 days after that, Sunday, March the 6th, a couple of hours after the fall of the Alamo, unbeknownst to him that the Alamo has fallen, Sam Houston departs Washington on the Brazos. He's headed west. He's charged with raising an army, defending a people, and birthing a nation. Are you kidding me? Is this a joke? He's got 5 guys with him, and one of them's a kid. When he gets to Gonzales, he finds his militia is 374 men. Many of them do not have a gun. A lot of them don't have a full set of clothes on their person. They have less than 2 days' provisions. And Sam Houston will soon learn that the only cannons they have no way to be transported, and he throws them in the Guadalupe River. Have a nice day. Rumors begin to arrive that the Alamo has fallen. Houston tries to keep that from his militia, but he can't. 2 days after that, on March 13th, he dispatches his two best scouts, Deaf Smith and Henry Carnes, to go west to the Alamo and confirm the rumors. They only make it 20 miles. They run into Susanna Dickinson, her 18-month-old baby, Joe Travis, and a few others. They go straight back to Gonzales. By the way, Susanna Dickinson and her 18-month-old baby survived the Alamo siege in the sacristy inside the chapel, the door of which still exists. And if you come find me after this talk, I'll tell you where it is, because I know people in high places. This group returns immediately to Gonzales. The scenes of that town on the night of March 13th are terrible. Remember, 3 weeks earlier, 32 men had left that tiny little settlement to go to the Alamo and fight. They're not coming home. Dads, brothers, husbands. Houston now realizes that he is outmanned perhaps as much as 10-1 by the Mexican army 60 miles to the west. With no force available to repel that enemy, he packs up the town, burns it to the ground, and begins his great retreat. Every wagon in Gonzales, Texas was used to carry women, elderlies, children, and worldly possessions, except one. The one wagon, solely devoted to any other purpose, carried all the munitions of war that the Texas militia possessed, and it was described as being not overloaded. Have a nice day. Houston's path takes him straight east and a little bit north. He crosses the Colorado near Ellinger, turns south, and camps for 11 days on the east side of the Colorado River. About half of that time is on the east bank of the Colorado, a few miles south of Interstate 10 at Columbus. Every indication we have is that Sam Houston was preparing to make his stand there on the Colorado. Why? Because Anglo-Texas lived east of the Colorado. He kept his cards very, very close to his vest, rarely telling anybody anything about his plans, leading many to believe that he didn't have a plan. For the only time in the entire Texas Revolution, for 2 days, while he's camped there on the east bank of the Colorado, the numbers in his militia swell, such that he now outnumbers the Mexican Army division in front of him. Not the Mexican Army, just the one division in front of him. It appears Houston was preparing to do battle with that division, perhaps as early as March 26th or 27th. But everything changed on March 25. Peter Kerr rode his horse into camp. He told Houston that Fannin had fallen at Goliad and been captured. Fannin was Houston's last great hope. He had repeatedly ordered and or requested that Fannin retreat in an effort to consolidate forces. Fannin either ignored the orders or circumstances prevented him from complying. Armed with this new information, Sam Houston balks, pivots, and continues his retreat. Had Sam Houston engaged the Mexican army there on the Colorado River as he intended to do, to some unknown conclusion, San Jacinto never happens, and you're not having steak for lunch. Houston would be criticized for the rest of his life for failing to protect the Anglo settlements east of the Colorado by engaging the Mexican army right there. His path takes him straight east to San Felipe de Austin, the epicenter of Anglo immigration in Texas. That's 1 mile north of Interstate 10 on the west bank of the Brazos. He burns that town to the ground, turns north, and camps for 2 weeks south of Hempstead on or near the Gross Plantation, a part of which is in my family today. It's there that he's going to cross the Brazos River. Santa Anna is right on his tail. Santa Anna gets to San Felipe de Austin while the ruins are still smoldering. He turns south to Fort Bend, where he will cross the Brazos, and from here, all roads lead to San Jacinto. Now, I want you to, by the way, there's your Independence Hall. That picture was taken in the late 1800s, and that blew down in the hurricane of 1900. I want you to know that Santa Anna was a good strategist, and he was a good military man. His strategy was sound. I'm going to show it to you very quickly. He's moving his army by division, west to east. As these divisions move, they will open up like a claw, and that claw will close and destroy this tiny little fledgling renegade militia. It was a good strategy. Specifically, Santa Anna and Filasola are moving straight east from San Antonio on Interstate 10. Urea is coming up the coast on 59 North. Sesma and Gaona, they're in Bastrop, coming down Highway 71. Houston is in Hempstead. He'll go across and down 249, and they're all heading for Gillies in Pasadena. Several things happened that contributed to the most unlikely victory by, listen carefully, the Anglo and Hispanic Federalist militia over the dictator's centrist army. First thing, Santa Anna decides to stay in Texas and conduct the war personally. He's of the mind that the war is over after the fall of the Alamo. All that's left is a little mop-up operation of this tiny little fledgling militia. He's going to leave that in Filasola's hands and go back the triumphant victor. He wants to get there quickly because the guy he left in charge of his government back in Mexico City unexpectedly dies. The only way he can get there quickly is by sea through Veracruz. And Texas Navy had rendered his ship incapacitated. We had a Navy. Some think it worthy of a Saturday Night Live skit, but it did some very significant things. So here's my point. Santa Anna decides to stay in Texas and conduct the war personally. Had he left, control of the military in Texas would have fallen to the Italian-born Jacinto Filasola, the most capable general in the theater, a very disciplined warrior, and a man who was not prone to the opium addiction and perhaps distracting attraction to the Yellow Rose of Texas that Santa Anna was. Second set of curious circumstances that happened. While Santa Anna is in Fort Bend, crossing the Brazos, he receives intelligence that the fledgling Texas government, that's David Burnett, president, and the Mexican Lorenzo de Zavala, vice president, are retreating from Washington on the Brazos to Harrisburg, southeast corner of Loop 610 here in Houston. Santa Anna takes 700 men, one cannon, and off he goes, straight east to Harrisburg in a lightning run to capture the government, the king on the chessboard. Shortly thereafter, Deaf Smith and Henry Carnes. Here these guys go again. They show up all the time in the Revolution with critical intelligence, and they do it again. Deaf Smith's real name is Erastus. Back in the day, they would have referred to him as Deaf Smith. He's a mostly deaf scout. Figure that out. He's said to have had his other senses in extraordinary measure. He and his boss, Henry Carnes, the guy that's in charge of all the Texas Scouts. 23-year-old Henry Carnes in charge of all the Texas Scouts. Together track and capture a courier running information between Filasola and Santa Anna. They capture him near the corner of Bel Air Boulevard and Rice Avenue, right there in the Bel Air Triangle. That courier has in his possession a deerskin saddlebag. It has initials on it, WBT, William Barrett Travis. It was a trophy from the Alamo. Between the courier and the contents of the saddlebag and some additional intelligence, Sam Houston soon learns about Santa Anna's lightning run to the east, to Harrisburg, which, by the way, he would burn to the ground, and shortly thereafter burn New Washington to the ground. That's modern-day LaPorte. He's going to turn north and cross the San Jacinto River at Lynch's Ferry. Incidentally, there in New Washington was a hotel owned by James Morgan, and that hotel had in its employment a young free woman of mixed racial descent named Emily West. History very almost certainly tells us that she was captured by the Mexican army and taken to San Jacinto. In later years, she would become known as the Yellow Rose of Texas. Back to the story. According to James Winters, one of the militiamen in Houston's army, once Sam Houston learned about this lightning run to the east and the north turn to Lynch's Ferry, they did not eat for 2 days. Apparently, Sam Houston was racing to beat Santa Anna to Lynch's Ferry. He would arrive on what would become the San Jacinto battleground just after midnight in the early morning hours of April the 20th. He backs himself into a corner. Over his right shoulder and behind him is Buffalo Bayou and the retired battleship Texas. It must have been an awesome sight. Over his left shoulder is the San Jacinto River and Lynch's Ferry. 6 hours later, the Mexican army appears from the south and shuts the door. Houston and his band of not-so-merry militiamen are trapped. Santa Anna would brag in his manifesto, published in 1837, that he trapped Houston at San Jacinto, and indeed he did. What he didn't understand is that apparently Sam Houston placed himself there intentionally to cause the conflict. I want you to push the pause button for just a minute, and I want you to consider Sam Houston. He's been called a grand strategist. He's also been called a great coward who is nothing more than the luckiest human being on the planet. So which one was he? Many, if not most, tend towards the lucky coward side of that equation. I believe we can get some insight into part of that answer when you consider who he was in here. Sam Houston was a hard-drinking, hard-cussing gambler. He would bet anybody anything, anytime. I've been in the vault in Huntsville, and I viewed a piece of paper, a little bit bigger than the hand, that memorialized a bet Sam Houston, big drunk, made with Augustus Allen, founder of the modern-day city of Houston. The bet was that Big Drunk could not stop drinking for 1 year, 1838. The loser had to buy the winner a $500 suit. That's real money in 1838. My point is, he was a gambler. This is where I'm going. What has every gambler done every time they've placed a bet in the history of the world? They assess risk and reward. Give me a situation, draw a line, I will assess risk and reward and pick a side. That's the nature of gambling. Houston constantly was doing this. It was in his DNA. I cannot accept the fact, the allegation that he simply lost that skill when he was appointed commander of the Texas Army. Consider Sam Houston's actions. He ran away from the Mexican army 100% of the time during the entire Texas Revolution, except once, when he started moving towards Harrisburg and San Jacinto. That coincides exactly with the time that he learned Santa Anna is making a lightning run to the east, that he's personally in charge of a Mexican army division that's the same size as his militia. And by making this lightning run to the east, he is distancing himself from all of the other Mexican army divisions who cannot so quickly come to his rescue. It's the same reason that he gave for not engaging on the Colorado. There were other Mexican army divisions in close proximity. He could have beat the division in front of him, but he could have been wiped out by the other divisions that were very close. I believe Sam Houston saw the risk-reward pendulum swing slightly in his favor. That's when, the one and only time, that he moved towards San Jacinto. I believe he was at least a decent strategist. He certainly could assess risk and reward, and he got a great big old fat dose of good luck. Let's get back to the story. At 9 o'clock the next morning, Santa Anna receives 500 choice reinforcements from General Koss. That's the same guy that pledged never to set foot on Texas soil again after the Battle of Behar. I can only assume he went to public school and had a bad memory. Santa Anna pulls out his looking glass and he looks into the Texan camp 1 mile away, flat grassy plain, no obstructions, as y'all well know, and he sees nothing going on. He becomes convinced the battle will happen the next day, and he famously tells his troops to go to sleep. Meanwhile, in the Texan camp, it appears Sam Houston wavers in his determination to go into battle. Whether he writes himself or his lieutenants do or the militia takes matters into their own hands, I don't know. What we do know is that at about 3 o'clock, he gives the order to Colonel Wharton. According to a militia man in the army, in the militia, his exact words to Wharton were, "Fight and be damned." Within the hour, the Texas militia is marching in plain sight in an open field into the face of the Mexican army camp. And San Jacinto happens. Now, here's what you may not know about San Jacinto. Okay, that's a line I use with groups, but it doesn't really apply to the San Jacinto faithful here. I'm like a 5th grader talking to the PTA, okay? So we can get that out there. But for dramatic effect, here's what you may not know about San Jacinto. The surprise that happened at San Jacinto is not the surprise that I was taught in the 7th grade. I was taught the Mexican army was asleep. The Texan army just waltzed into the camp and slaughtered them all undetected. That is not how it happened. We have records from both armies that tell the same story, and that's not it. There was a surprise at San Jacinto. I'll show it to you. Remember, this is Napoleonic warfare. They're marching in lines. The Mexicans saw them coming. They discharged their cannon at the Texans a number of times. The first time was when the Texans were 350 yards out from the Mexican breastworks. Houston had ordered his men to march, but watch the muzzle of the cannon. And when you see the flash, hit the deck. Let the grape shot go over you, stand up and repeat. They took a number of shots from that Mexican cannon, all of which were poorly aimed, went over their heads, and doing no damage or injury. Houston finally orders his troops to return fire from 70 yards. One 16-year-old militiaman put the number at 50 yards. Here's the surprise that happened at San Jacinto. Instead of a protracted Napoleonic War standoff, right? We've all seen the movies where the first line discharges their weapon, and the second line steps forward while the first group is back here reloading, and so on and so forth, in a protracted standoff. Houston ordered his militia to fire their weapons and then run into the Mexican camp. It was shock and awe of the day. They were wholly unprepared to deal with knives and clubs. Remember, your whole militia has just discharged their weapon. They're not reloading. It was face to face, nose to nose, eye to eye, ugly warfare. We have a description of Santa Anna during the battle, who described, and it comes from one of Santa Anna's senior staff members, who described him in two ways. The first is laying on the ground, face down in the grass, shielding himself from the grape shot from the twin sister cannons. The second description is very, very telling. It's Santa Anna in a field, by himself, walking hurriedly, wringing his hands, talking to the wind, talking to nobody, unable to give an order, lending credibility to the theory that he had partaken in his opium addiction that day, and perhaps distracting attraction to the yellow rose of Texas. The battle lasted 18 minutes. 18 minutes that changed the world. The killing, however, went on until dark. Houston repeatedly ordered that killing to stop. He was both ignored and threatened by his own militia. Finally, in frustration, Sam Houston says, Gentlemen, I applaud your bravery, but damn your manners." And Texas was its own free nation. Well, at least in theory and on paper it was. It was dead flat broke. It issued a pile of paper money to finance the revolution. Most of the occupied part of the republic had been burned in the runaway scrape, and there were no crops in the ground. It's planting season. Many people do not realize that the war was not over after the Battle of San Jacinto. The Mexican army in Texas still outnumbers the militia 5, 6, maybe 7 to 1. And now, all of these scattered divisions of that Mexican army are concentrated in a small area, not very far away from the Texas militia. All Mexico had to do to win the war after San Jacinto was organize, turn around, and pull the trigger. Game is over. But now that Santa Anna had been captured, control of the military fell to the Italian, Vicente Filasola. He was a disciplined man of honor who obeyed his commands against the harsh criticism of all of his other generals, particularly Urrea, and the harsh criticism of the entire Mexican nation for the rest of his life. He obeyed his orders and retreated that army through a sea of mud back across the Rio Grande. And Texas was its own free nation. It would remain so for 2 weeks shy of 10 years. We've all seen this picture of the Republic, the occupied part and the claimed part. I show it to you again for only one reason, and that is to remind you that the next time you're snow skiing in the Texas Panhandle, in Vail, Aspen, and Steamboat Springs, I'm just saying. I'm often asked the question, I'll be brief and finished. I'm often asked the question, what was the most interesting thing I learned in all my research? It's an easy answer. It's the story of how Texas became the 28th state in the Union. That is a high drama, international game of political, complicated chess. And the chess master that pulled it off was the drunk gambler, Sam Houston. How he took the American powers in the Northeast that were staunchly opposed to adding another slave state into the Union, and in 5 short years, beginning with his second term as president, turned them on their heads to make Texas the 28th state. That is a great story. I wish I had time to tell you. It's in the book.
It's in this one?
Yes.
book that you're selling today.
Yes, ma'am.
Can't wait to read it.
Okay, couple of thoughts and I'll close. Shouts from the Republic is the product of research that I largely did in my own personal library, 2,260 some odd books, many first editions dating to the 1830s. Several years ago, I somewhat arbitrarily began a campaign of reading the oldest books I had, only original first editions that I personally own, in order of date of publication. I was taking copious notes, and I found I was reading their diaries, speeches, writings, personal accounts, early historians. And I was compiling all this information. And every night I would bring one of the old books down and I would show Jeannie, look at this. I can't believe I didn't know this. I thought I knew a lot about Texas history. That means this, that, and the other. And she would say, that's nice, honey, and roll her eyes and go back to needlepoint. We did this forever. And one night she asked me the most interesting question. Are you writing a book? And the thought had never occurred to me. And for the first time, I stepped back and looked at this mountain of information I had compiled, which, by the way, I had organized chronologically and topically. She says that's OCD. She also says it's ODD. I wish I could argue the point. And I began to go through all this stuff quickly, high level, 40,000 foot view. And I asked myself, okay, what's all this stuff say? What's the big line here? And everywhere I was looking, they were talking about how much they valued freedom, how much personal capital they were investing in obtaining and maintaining freedom before, during, and after the revolution. It drove their actions. It drove their reactions. And when I realized that, I told her, I am writing a book, and that's what it's about, because that's what they said it was about. No thanks to those who try to rewrite the story. I want you to look at this picture. This is a picture of my book sitting on the counter in another restaurant in Houston. Island Grill. You walk up to the counter, you see it. If it's interesting, you take a card, go home, order it off the internet, whatever. That's not impressive. But the reason why it's there is an interesting story. Island Grill is owned by Faisal Haddad. Faisal is 63. He came to the United States from Syria at 18. He got an education. Along the way, he bought a bankrupt smoothie store. Today, he has 5 restaurants in Houston, and he lives in a big house in Tanglewood. Faisal Haddad is the American dream. He read the book, and he told me, Blake, I've lived in a country that does not know freedom. I know what it's like. The average American, clueless as to the cost of freedom, the value of freedom, and the maintenance cost of freedom. I'm putting your book in my stores because I'm joining the mission to tell people or remind people about the cost of freedom. That is my mission. That was the mission of the Texas Revolution. I'm not bashful to ask people to join the mission. Buy the book, read it. If you agree with the mission, join it. Let's talk about this. Both sides of the political aisle. I close with this. If you remember nothing else from today, I ask you to remember the 2 historical quotes that open and close Shouts from the Republic. At the beginning of chapter 1, mankind is ruled by oppression until some are willing to die that others may live free. That is your heritage. At the end of the book, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. That is your responsibility.